I used to think being good at my job was enough. That, if I showed up on time, kept my word, and did honest work, the rest of life would sort itself out eventually. I'm 32 years old. I do structural assessments for a mid-sized engineering firm in Vancouver, the kind of work where you spend 3 hours on a roof in the rain checking load-bearing points while someone below you is worried about their renovation budget. It's not glamorous, but I'm good at it, and I've always believed that counts for something. I hadn't been on a date in almost 2 years when my coworker Patrick set me up with someone he'd met through his wife's book club. He didn't give me much to go on. "She's a court interpreter," he said, "French and English, works downtown. You'll like her. She actually listens when people talk." That last part stuck with me. I didn't know if it was a compliment or an indictment of every other woman Patrick assumed I'd been dating. Her name was Simone Beauchamp. We agreed on a Thursday evening at a place on Granville Street. Nothing too formal, just a wine bar with good lighting and small plates. I got there early because I'm always early. I ordered sparkling water and waited. At 6:15 she texted, "Running late. I'm so sorry, don't leave, I didn't leave." At 6:40 she walked in. She was still in her work clothes. A charcoal blazer, a blouse that had been pressed that morning but had since given up the fight, her hair pulled back in a way that suggested it had started the day, intentional, and ended it otherwise. She was carrying a tote bag stuffed with folders and her lanyard with her Courthouse ID was still around her neck. She hadn't had time to take it off. She stopped just inside the door and looked at me across the room with an expression I hadn't expected. Not embarrassment exactly. Something quieter. Like she'd already decided I was going to be disappointed and had made peace with it. I stood up. She walked over and said, before I could get a word out, "I look like I just escaped a courthouse." Because I did. A sentencing ran 4 hours over, and I had a witness who needed everything interpreted in real time, and I couldn't leave, and I am so sorry. I said, "Sit down. You made it." She looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. "I made you wait 40 minutes, she said. 43, I said. "But I had good sparkling water." She laughed. It was small and surprised, the kind of laugh that happens before a person decides whether or not they're going to let themselves relax. She sat down, pulled her lanyard off finally, and dropped it into the tote bag. She looked at the menu. Then she looked back up at me. "You're not upset? Why would I be upset? Because I'm late. And I look like this." "You look like someone who worked hard today," I said. "That's not something to apologize for." She was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up the menu again and I could see something shift in her shoulders. A small, almost invisible settling, like she'd been braced for something and the something hadn't come. We stayed at that wine bar for 3 hours. I learned that Simone had moved to Vancouver from Montreal 6 years ago, that she spoke 4 languages and understood pieces of 2 more, that she had grown up watching her father, a Quebecois civil servant, interpret for visiting delegations, and had decided at age 9 that words were the most important things in the world. I learned that she had a particular dislike for people who said "per se" incorrectly, and that she kept a small notebook in her coat pocket to write down sentences she heard in passing that she found beautiful. I told her about my job, about the way buildings tell you things if you know how to look, the way a hairline crack in a foundation can mean nothing or everything depending on the angle, the moisture, the age. I told her about a heritage home in Kitsilano I'd been hired to assess that turned out to have a basement with hand-laid stone from 1912, still solid, still perfectly level. She leaned forward when I said that. She said, "Things that were built carefully last." I thought about that later, driving home over the bridge with the city lights spread out below me. She texted at 11:30. "Thank you for not leaving." I almost canceled twice. I wrote back, "I'm glad you didn't," she replied. "Me too." We saw each other again the following week. Dinner in Chinatown, easy and unhurried. The week after that, a Saturday afternoon at the farmer's market on Trout Lake. She bought 3 kinds of cheese and a bunch of kale she said she would definitely cook, but probably wouldn't. I bought her a coffee without asking because I'd noticed at the wine bar she'd ordered it before dessert, and I'd remembered. She noticed. "You pay attention," she said. "Occupational habit," I said. It became a thing between us. Small attentions. I'd noticed she preferred the window seat. She'd remember I took my coffee black. Neither of us made a production of it. It was just there, woven into things. But Simone's schedule was not simple. Court interpretation isn't a 9 to 5. Cases run long. Witnesses go off script. A hearing scheduled for Tuesday afternoon can bleed into Wednesday morning without warning. She was also on call for the provincial court system, which meant her phone could vibrate at 7 a.m. on a Saturday with a request she couldn't refuse. The third time she canceled on me, a dinner I'd actually cooked, which is not a thing I do casually. I sat in my apartment with 2 plates going cold and tried to figure out what I was feeling. She'd called, not texted. That was something. She'd sounded genuinely exhausted, her voice low and rough in a way I'd started to recognize. She said, "There was an incident at the remand center. I can't explain. I have to go back in. I'm sorry, Marcus." Her using my name like that, in that voice, made it hard to be angry. But I was a little angry, not at her. At the situation, maybe. At the fact that I'd bought fresh pasta from the Italian place on Commercial Drive and it was going to be terrible by tomorrow. I put the food away. I sat on the couch. I asked myself, honestly, whether this was something I could do long term. Whether I was the kind of person who could hold space for someone whose life didn't always leave room for me. I didn't know yet. A month in, we had an evening that went perfectly. Nothing elaborate. Just a walk along the seawall, fish and chips from a takeout window, sitting on a bench watching the cargo ships move through Burrard Inlet in the dark. She was relaxed in a way I hadn't seen before. Her work phone was in her bag on silent. She ate with both hands and didn't check anything. She told me about a case she'd been interpreting for. She couldn't share details, she was careful about that, but she said it was the kind of thing that made her feel like language was both the most fragile and the most important thing humans had invented. That sometimes the exact right word was the difference between someone being understood and someone being failed by the system entirely. "Does it weigh on you?" I asked. "Every day," she said. "But it also, I don't know. It's the only thing I've ever been certain I'm supposed to be doing. Does that make sense?" It did. It made complete sense. I thought about the stone basement in Kitsilano, the things built carefully. I walked her to her car that night. Before she got in, she turned and said quietly, "I keep waiting for you to decide this is too complicated." I said, "Who told you it had to be simple?" She didn't answer that. She looked at me for a moment, then nodded, once, and got in the car. I walked home in the rain because I'd forgotten where I'd parked and I didn't mind at all. The harder stretch came in February. Simone was assigned to a long-running organized crime trial that had started in the fall and wasn't going to conclude until spring. The hours were brutal. She was in court by 8, sometimes 7:30. She was often still there at 6 or 7 in the evening. On the days the trial recessed, she spent her evenings reviewing terminology and preparing for the next session. She stopped going to her book club. She started forgetting to eat lunch. I noticed things changing in the spaces between us. Not in how she felt about me. I wasn't worried about that. But in her. She was disappearing into the work in a way that concerned me. She was sharp-edged and tired and apologetic in a way that had become reflexive, automatic, disconnected from any specific thing she was apologizing for. Like sorry had become a verbal tick rather than a feeling. One evening I drove downtown after work and texted her. "I'm outside. Don't change your plans. I just brought food." She came out 20 minutes later in her courthouse lanyard and that same worn blazer, holding her tote bag, looking like she'd run a marathon that was still technically in progress. She stopped on the steps and looked at me. I had a bag from her favorite Thai place on Davie Street. I'd also brought a thermos of tea because she'd mentioned once, months ago, that she found tea steadying in a way coffee wasn't by the end of the day. She'd said it once. I'd kept it. She said, "Marcus, just my name. That was all." I said, "You have 45 minutes before you said you had to be back. Let's sit somewhere." We found a bench in the little plaza near the library. We ate pad see ew out of containers, and she talked. Really talked. Not the careful edited version she sometimes offered when she was worried about burdening me, but the actual unfiltered version. About how exhausted she was. About the weight of carrying other people's words all day. Of being the conduit between someone's reality and the language of a system that didn't always fit. About feeling like she was disappearing. I listened. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't tell her it would get easier, or that she was doing great, or any of the things that people say when they don't know what else to say. I just let her talk until she ran out of words, which took a while, and by the end she was leaning against my shoulder with an empty takeout container in her hands and the city noise around us, and I think she was almost asleep for about 90 seconds. Then her phone buzzed. She straightened up. She looked at the screen. She said, "I have to go back in." "I know," I said. She stood up. She pulled her lanyard straight. She picked up her tote bag. Then she turned and looked at me with an expression I didn't quite have a word for. "Why do you do this?" she said. "You could be with someone whose evenings are actually available." I said, "I don't want someone whose evenings are available. I want you." She pressed her lips together. She nodded like she was filing it somewhere. Then she said, "I'll call you when I'm done." She called at 10:47. I was still awake. She didn't say much. She was too tired for conversation. She just said, "Are you there?" I said, "I'm here." She said, "Okay." And then, after a moment, "Thank you for the tea." She got a commendation in March. The trial concluded, and the presiding judge formally acknowledged the quality of interpretation services in the verdict documents, which is apparently unusual and was a significant thing in her field. Her supervisors sent around an email. Her colleagues celebrated in the courthouse cafeteria with grocery store cake. She texted me about it with 3 words: "We got him." I brought her flowers that evening. Not a big romantic gesture. Just a bunch of tulips from the grocery store because I'd been driving past and thought of her. She opened the door in sweatpants, hair down for the first time I could remember seeing it down on a weekday, and she looked at the tulips and then at me, and something in her face just opened. She had been, I realized, so braced for so long that she hadn't known she was still braced. She let me in. We ordered pizza. We watched something forgettable on television. She fell asleep on the couch at 9:15, and I covered her with the blanket she kept folded over the armrest and let myself out quietly. She texted in the morning, "I'm sorry I fell asleep on you." I wrote back, "Don't apologize for that," she replied. "You're a strange man, Marcus." Then, after a minute, "I mean that as a compliment." We had a real conversation about the future in April, out on the patio of a place in East Van, the kind of evening where it's finally warm enough to sit outside, but you still need a jacket. She had a glass of wine, I had a beer, the sun was going down, in that long, slow way it does in Vancouver in spring, like it's trying to making. I said, "About?" She said, "About what you said. In February, that you wanted me specifically, not someone with available evenings." I meant it. "I know you did." She turned her wine glass. "That's what I've been thinking about. Because I've always assumed that the job was a deal breaker eventually. For everyone. That I'd meet someone who said all the right things, and then somewhere around month 3 they'd start resenting the cancellations. And we'd have a fight that would be ostensibly about something else, but was actually about this, and that would be that. And you haven't done that." She looked at me. You adapted. Without being asked. You showed up at the courthouse with Thai food and a thermos of tea, and you didn't make it a whole thing. You just did it. "It didn't feel like a sacrifice," I said. "That's not me being noble. It genuinely didn't. Why not?" I thought about how to say it honestly. I said, "Because I wasn't trying to fit you into a version of a relationship that I'd already decided on. I was just trying to figure out what worked for us. That's different." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I'd like to try. Properly, not just seeing what happens, I mean actually trying." I said, "Yeah, too." She picked up her wine glass. I picked up my beer. We didn't toast because neither of us is the toasting type. But she smiled. That small, real smile that she didn't distribute widely, and I thought about all the things that get built carefully and last. That was 6 months ago now. Simone is still an interpreter for the provincial court. Her schedule is still not simple. She still sometimes cancels, and I still sometimes sit in my apartment, recalibrating, and there are evenings when her phone goes off in the middle of dinner, and she has to step away for 20 minutes, and I eat my food and wait. And that is just what the life looks like. But she stopped apologizing automatically. She told me that was something she'd noticed, that she was apologizing less, not because she cared less, but because she'd finally believed that I wasn't keeping score. Last month she came with me to assess a building in Strathcona, an old warehouse being converted to residential, and I showed her the original fir beams in the upper level, 100-year-old wood still holding weight without apology. She ran her hand along one of them and said quietly, "Things built carefully last." I remembered that she'd said that. The first night at the wine bar when I told her about the stone foundation. She remembered too. She looked at me when she said it. She was smiling. I told her I loved her for the first time in that warehouse, surrounded by century-old lumber and the smell of sawdust and the sound of traffic rising up from the street below. She said, "I know." Then she said, "I love you too." I've been trying to find the right moment to say it, and I kept waiting for something more atmospheric. And I think a warehouse actually qualifies. I laughed. She laughed. We walked out into the afternoon together, and the city was loud and ordinary around us, and it was enough. It was more than enough.